Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Other Minds and Hands. So Maggie and I are here today to discuss episode 5, follow up on episode 5, anticipate episode 6. There's still a lot to discuss about episode 5, I know. And then, of course, there's some other ideas and issues that have come up or questions that we've already been asked that I'm really interested to discuss. So, I would... All right. Hang on a second.
There we go.
I just realized I forgot something. Okay, there we go.
I was just worried that there wasn't any chat yet. I was like,
we're good. Well, it always takes a little while for notifications to go out and everything and folks to come in. All right.
Ahoy, Pixel Riffs.
Yeah, Davin is, Maggie, complimenting you on your insight. Your segment was really particularly cool this week. Lots of people have been commenting on that.
Can I just give you a behind the scenes moment of why it was so much better? Because I filmed it 7 times.
Oh man.
It took I don't have the setup Corey has. I'm using a basic camera and stuff, and it just would not capture. And one of them captured half, and one of them captured the first third. So I did it so many times, guys, that yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this week too, because I feel like this was the first week that I actually delved into some film language. We've just been talking about concepts before this. So it was really fun to do like a scene read, which I haven't done in so long. So yeah, getting the cobwebs off my brain, but also like digging into something cool like that. And yeah, it was lovely.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, again, thanks to everyone who's I'm really glad people have been enjoying Rings and Realms. We have a really fun and growing audience there, and that's been good. I'm always happy to see the people who comment on how like refreshing it is to watch a show like ours in the midst of all of the like controversy and negativity. And it really is. I mean, it's just like, to me, it's like an illustration of sort of the point. It's not the point of like, you know, people always want to break things down to like either you're praising the show or you're condemning the show, right? Like those are the only two options that you can do. And it's like, no, actually, you know, where the fun is, is just discussing, just analyzing, just like, let's look at it and let's think about it. And it's okay. You don't have to think like, is this a great show? Is this a not great show? It doesn't matter. Let's like think about what's there. And there is so much fun. There is so much, I don't know, like relief from pressure in that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I'm really I'm enjoying the process, but I have to admit too that I'm also finding it a nice challenge, because so much of what I feel like we do is review often in our lives, right? Like, did you like that movie? Did you not? But it's almost refreshing to not have to engage in that question. That's the only question everybody's asking me. Do you like it? I couldn't tell you, because I'm really enjoying the analysis. So like, you know, I don't want to join the voice of the masses that are reacting. I really like that we are just providing analysis. And the thing I'm really enjoying about our comments too is just how thoughtful so many of them are. I think we're going to share one shortly that we had today, but so thoughtful in terms of like helping us kind of figure out what we want to talk about and what you guys are confused about. And I even messaged Corey this week being like, this might have been the episode that lost me, because I struggled this week with a whole load of stuff. And I'm fine to admit that to you guys. Like, I don't want it to seem all roses. Like, there's stuff I'm struggling with this show, and there's stuff I'm finding fascinating and well done, and all this, everything in between. So it was so nice to have Corey's segment, because we talk through it before he films it, but I don't get the 2 hours until you guys do. So it was so nice to like have that and be like, oh, okay, you know? Yeah. So, yeah, I really appreciate that.
And the one thing I would say, I would sort of remind people of course, don't mistake my analysis for inside information. I'm not telling you I know this stuff is true. I'm saying, here's the picture that I'm seeing, right? Here are the main options that I'm seeing. And I do think, like, I know that in episode 5, in my discussion of episode 5, I was really kind of, there was a lot, I was kind of putting a lot out there, right? I mean, I said there were sort of 2 primary readings that I can see of the show. One is that this is all a deception in the ways that I was discussing, and the other is that the show has really left the rails in some ways, and has now deviated from Tolkien's world in ways that it really has not done to this point. And I don't know. I don't know. I still think that option 1 is more likely than option 2, because it would be very strange to me. It would be very strange to me that they would be as consistent as they've been in with Tolkien's themes and world, and then all of a sudden in episode 5 go off in so many different, in so many different ways. And there are some I've seen some. Sorry, go ahead.
Like, I guess I love that perspective, and that made a lot of sense, and I love all the chat about Elrond's skeptical face. I should also give a disclaimer. There's a dog under the sofa under me, so if you hear the whining, it's Merlin. Don't worry, he's here.
Right. He may make a. Merlin tends to make more forceful appearances than my dog does.
Merlin makes himself known blatantly, so you might see him. But my question is, like, I don't know your thoughts on casual viewers. Like, will they put in the time? Do they need to put in the time? Like,
right.
That's the line I'm struggling with. Like, it shouldn't take a 2-hour explanatory show of Rings and Realms for me to understand what's going on. But I feel like that's for us, right? That's for the Tolkien people. If you don't know the lore, is it making sense? Yeah,
and as I said in the show, like I'm not 100% sure. I mean, I suspect that there's some level of confusion from everybody. I think that episode 5 was just a confusing show, but I do think it's more acute, like because the where the confusion is coming from, where I hear it coming from, it's primarily based on what we know about Tolkien. It isn't like what exactly were they saying, but rather, how could they have been saying that, given the, what we know? Like, how could Gil-galad be saying that? Gil-galad. I've been doing better. I'm still a work in progress.
It's been good, though. This past week has been like a real turning point. I don't know if I've messed it up once, and I've only heard you do it once or twice.
I've been trying hard. I've been trying hard. See, interviewing Benjamin Walker might be a turning point in my Gil-galad pronunciation career. You talk to Gil-galad, you change
your tone.
Exactly. But anyway, so there have been all kinds of sort of questions with that. But again, they seem to be mostly based on what we already know from Tolkien. Like that was really the problem. So we'll see. But again, so I keep in mind, like, what I am striving to do is retain the kind of analytic objectivity that I think is so important when doing analysis like this. And what I mean by objectivity is to try to be open to follow where the data leads, right? Not to have theories and adopt theories and then try, because you can always do that, right? I mean, I love every week, it seems, right? Like whenever Halbrand is on screen, the people who are convinced that Sauron is Halbrand are everything he said just proves, it's now more obvious than ever that Halbrand is Sauron. Because you can always do that. You can always find evidence to support your thesis. That's always true. So I'm trying as much as I can. I mean, you guys, I've not been shy about telling you what my interpretations are, that I don't think Halbrand is Sauron, that I do think the stranger is a blue wizard, and that, I think that Anatar is already an Eregion. I'm trying not to just be wishy-washy about it, but at the same time, I want to be open to where the data is actually leading. So what I've said about episode 5, I might change my mind, as we see more things revealed over the next few episodes. Every week I'm going to be trying to sort of evaluate and to reevaluate that. And we'll see, we'll see what I think about this as we go. But anyway, so that'll be cool. One discussion we had at Mountain Moot, actually, we had several fun discussions of the Rings of Power at Mountain Moot this past weekend out in Denver. And one of the theories that I came away from Mountain Moot, well, I don't say 100% convinced by, but much more interested in than I had been before, is I think that I have been sort of assuming. But in retrospect, I'm like, I don't think there's actually any data behind it. I think it's been an assumption on my part. One of the things that I've been assuming that we would see is like Sauron's lieutenants. Basically, Sauron doing stuff like the Rings of Power plan, the Anatar plan, right? Like sooner or later we were going to get there, clearly, because, you know, the Rings of Power going to actually be forged. So like that, you know, that I've been expecting. But that he would also be like pushing things forward in other places so that his big scheme is ready, so that when the Rings of Power are forged, he can retire back to Mordor, which will have been set in place, you know. But anyway, so that's what I've been expecting. So I think I've been quick to assume that Adar is one of Sauron's lieutenants. Like, that's been kind of almost really more of a premise than a conclusion of mine. And that's the thing that I was sort of realizing this week, as there were a couple people at Mountain Moot who were arguing forcibly that Adar is... There's no reason to think that Adar is necessarily serving Sauron. And indeed, his reaction to being called Sauron by Waldreg could be taken as evidence that he is, in fact, himself anti-Sauron, that he's a rival to Sauron rather than a servant of Sauron. Yeah. And I the more we were talking about that, the more I was like, yeah, no, you're right. Like it was that my conclusions about that really do come more from an initial premise of my own than from
well, and I still don't feel strongly about one or the other. It's more about being open to that as an option, you know?
Right.
It's like,
right.
Yeah, I could see that too. Yeah.
Right. Oh, that's really interesting. As Fruit Chew says, I think Adar is serving Sauron. Whether Adar is aware of that is a different question. That's a really good way of thinking about it. I think that's probably right.
Druid's fire too. While Sauron is the big bad, there's other evils in the world. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Exactly. And some of them.
He's the big bad. He's not the only bad.
Right. Exactly. And Sauron might be. Especially in these relatively early stages, right? Sauron might be demonstrating his, you know, skill at, you know, planning and rising to power, not at delegation, but at manipulation of others. Like there are other evil powers in the world that are trying to make their own thing. And Sauron is going to not just control them necessarily from the beginning, but make use of them, right? Even if they don't realize that. So yeah, and what I'm saying is that would work just as well. I think that could be really powerful. So, yeah, exactly. Darren says, I think there will be competition over who becomes Morgoth's successor. Right. And I agree. Darren, I do agree. The smart money is on Sauron in that struggle. But sure. I think that's yeah. So as I say, as we were talking it through, I was realizing that's really a line of thinking that I think I have not been sort of just open enough to. And again, this is why you always have to be like vigilant. Like you always have to be, and it's one of the things that's so much fun, right? Is to sort of recognize these things and the constant reevaluation of all of your positions as your data pool increases, right? You can't just be, it's not an additive process, right? Every chunk of new data really leads you to have to evaluate the whole all over again.
This feels like a really opportune time to share that tweet. Can we do that?
Yeah.
Wish I'd pulled it up on the screen. You don't have it handy, do you?
Oh, I can
read it, but I mean...
Actually, why don't you just read it quick, rather than taking time
I'm a visual person, so if you guys need to find this, we can post it somewhere after. But it was a lovely tweet that was sent out to us today, and it's been shared and whatnot a lot. So this is Julian Invictus, Invincible One is his handle. And he wrote, the greatest disservice we do to ourselves as fans of Tolkien's work is to stand at the finish line of the narrative, yelling at the characters who are experiencing it as their story. I cannot stress enough how we are abusing our knowledge rather than letting it enrich our experience. One more time. The greatest disservice we do to ourselves as fans of Tolkien's work is to stand at the finish line of the narrative, yelling at the characters who are experiencing it as a story. I cannot stress enough how we are abusing our knowledge rather than letting it enrich our experience.
Yes.
I mean, think about like any parent who's trying to stand by and let their kid learn something. It's so hard to not like step in and just do it because you know how to do it. Like that's kind of the parallel I had here of here we are standing at the finish line saying, but that's not who you are. Well, she's not yet.
She's
or
not
he's
yet.
not yet.
Yes.
Or they're not yet, you know?
Yes. Yes.
It is, yeah.
The application of that
asking
concept.
for the link to that tweet. I'll find the link and I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, yeah. We can put it in the description of the episode as well. But
yeah, we'll do that too.
Yeah, I mean oh, there we go. Druid's Fire just posted it. Thanks, Druid's Fire.
Thanks, Druid's Fire.
Anyway, yeah. So the Druid's Fire. There you go. She posted that on YouTube as well. Awesome. You're all over it. So anyway, like, the way that this applies to Galadriel's character is really obvious, right? Everybody sort of saying at the beginning, like, I really hate this. Like the idea of warrior Galadriel is such a belittling of her character. So, yeah, because she has growth yet to go. She's going to grow beyond that. If you don't like warrior Galadriel, I doubt she's going to just be warrior Galadriel at the end of the show. Let's give her a chance to go there, right? Yeah. So,
and I think I also mentioned it in Rings and Realms, but like somebody pointed out, where we are in the Lord of the Rings, the Jackson trilogy, like we've gotten to the pub and we've met Strider. Like
right.
That's how far into this story we are. We know no context of anything. So think of all the assumptions the Hobbits had as they left the Shire that were completely inaccurate because they didn't know the world yet. So we're kind of in a similar situation.
Yeah.
It also made me think of the pacing of any TV show. Like, if you watch the first couple episodes of Friends, they're painful. Like it takes a little while for like characters to get their groove. And we know they had a 5-season arc, but they hadn't written these voices yet. They hadn't written these dialogue. There's so many factors about like story building and world building, character building to make it believable that they're still kind of getting their groove too. And no, not every show needs that. Some hit the ground running and are epic from episode 1, but
right.
I'm okay to give it a little grace to be like, yeah, they're still finding their feet.
Right, exactly. And as Highlander Winds points out, there are shows which, like you said, the first 2 seasons of Star Trek: The Next Generation weren't that great either. Yes, like that show is an excellent show by the time you get to season 5, at least, right? Like, I mean, man, season 5 and 6 are phenomenal of that show, but it takes a while. It takes a while. And the kind of impatience.
And we know this had a lot more development. We know this had a lot more funding, but they're also trying to plant Easter eggs for us while also providing a show that's satisfying to the casual viewer and seem to be walking that line okay.
Right.
So, yeah, there's a lot of plates spinning here.
Yeah, for sure. No, I agree. I think that is such an important perspective. And it's not just about things like character development and story development. It's also in like elements of the story as well, right? I mean, it's even some of the assumptions that people make about chronology, right? Like that's not supposed to happen. I don't know. There are ways in which even some of that stuff is really kind of fitting into this, right? Like, I know, like basically think about what the assertion that lies behind. There's an assertion that lies behind a lot of the chronological things, right? Like that's not supposed to happen yet. That's supposed to have happened earlier. And there are some assumptions about like cause and effect and how these events are supposed to connect with each other, which again, like if we can just like hang on, like we know what we know, right? And I think it very likely that we're gonna get to the place where we know we're gonna get to, right? We're gonna see Numenor fall. We're gonna see the Last Alliance and the final duel with Sauron on Mount Doom. Like we know where we're headed, and I think we're gonna get to where we're headed. And I think even that we're going to get that when we get there, it's going to look like we sort of expect that it might look. My hope, though, is that it's going to be, when we get there, it's going to be a really powerful new experience because we will have this whole perspective on the trajectory of each of these characters. Like we don't know exactly what it meant to go Galad to fight on Mount Doom, right? Like that, to fight and die on Mount Doom. How we have a few hints, right, as to how this is the culmination of what Gil-galad has been doing for thousands of years, right? But we have to guess at those. We just, like, Tolkien never wrote Gil-galad's story in that way. He never told us what was going on with him, what was motivating him, right? What he had been struggling with, and how this, was all playing out. We'll get that, we'll get, I mean, goodness, just thinking about Isildur and what we've seen from Isildur so far. Actually, like, low-key, Isildur is one of the characters I'm really interested in. Like, he's not one of the big ones, And so I feel like I spend a lot of time focusing on Galadriel and the other big characters. But the sort of character trajectory of Isildur is something that I'm that I'm watching with great interest. Especially, again, because I'm thinking about where I expect Isildur, of course, to be, like, front and center, one of the, like, the
key
central,
players.
most important character, in the final scenes. In the final episode is going to be like the Isildur show, right? So how are we going to get there from this guy? And I think we can begin to see some of the ways in which we see that moving forward. So anyway, I think it's really cool. Yeah. But
Okay, so what from episode 5 that you didn't get to cover in the 2 hours of Rings and Realms do you want to cover tonight?
Ooh, okay. So there's one thing I was deliberately saving for Rings and Realms, which I should totally do. So several people have commented on how admirably brief I was in my analysis of the poem. And I did that on purpose. So first of all, again, another kind of behind the scenes thing. My analysis of, this is like the reverse, Maggie, of your behind the scenes thing. My analysis of the song was done in one take, and I had on purpose, I didn't prep it at all. Normally,
for the record, most of mine are usually that.
yeah.
For the record.
Right. So usually my segments, I have an outline that I'm working from, and I have, like, this list of points that I want to make sure that I'm remembering to hit. So I have a teleprompter which doesn't have like prose on it, but it has, like, my outline so that I remember what things I'm supposed to go through. And I've usually talked through those because, of course, they're often preparing, like, the wall behind me and stuff. So we talk about what pictures will be relevant to what I'm talking about and that kind of thing to put up and everything. But anyway, when I did the song, I deliberately didn't prep at all. Like, I didn't even think, I listened to the song a bunch of times, right? So I spent, like for instance, driving into this studio, I spent the whole time, like, listening to the song over and over again. But anyway, I didn't prep what I was going to say about it. Like, I knew the kind of general thing that I wanted to do. But when I was talking my way through that, I had no idea where I was going. Like, that was completely spontaneous, which I just like. I
love doing that.
That's what I wanted to capture, because that's the kind of analysis that I love doing. So I was hoping it would work pretty well, and I felt like it worked well. But that was, like I said, that was almost it was almost like an indulgence, like self-indulgence, to, like, sort of give myself that time to just have fun with that. Yeah, exactly. But I was deliberately deviating from my normal plan, which is, like, people know who, like, watch Exploring the Lord of the Rings and Mythgard Academy know my approach to reading poetry is, like, first I look at the sound, like, look at the meter, the sound shape of the poem, and how the rhythm goes, so that we can see how that contributes to the meaning. And then we look at the word sounds, right? We look at the rhymes and alliteration and things like that again, so we can begin to see how what kind of shapes are emerging in the poem. And then I go through and I do the meaning. So I kind of jumped straight to the meaning. Basically, and I didn't do any of the other stuff. Even though it was funny, like, right before, no, it was right after. As soon as we cut on that scene, I was like, okay, so I want everybody to know that this poem is in Anapest, and it's blowing my mind. And, like, Ian and Greg and Ben were like, okay, that's duly noted. Right. But anyway, holy cow. Right. So It's not in iambs. That's the main thing I've come to unburden myself with today, is that the poem is fundamentally anapestic in order. Now, it has iambic elements. Like, most of the lines begin with an iambic foot. Okay.
I'm sorry. The producer in me is like, we need a screen.
I know.
Not iambic. Not iambic.
I know. Right. This just in. The Hobbit song, the Harfoot song is anapestic. Can you believe it? So no, it was at first I was like, because I was like totally. I was expecting like normal Hobbit meter. Right, it's not normal Hobbit meter. It's related to it. The first foot and the last foot. There are 4 feet per line. So there's like 4 stresses per line. Generally, and the first one and sometimes the last one are iambic, but the primary movement of the song is anapestic. Unstressed, unstressed, stress. Dun 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 dun. I mean, you think about how the song goes, right? Even like. This wandering day, right, by itself, like this wandering day. That's the typical. Not all those who wander are lost. I am Anapest, Anapest, Anapest. That's a very typical line from that song. Not all those who wander are lost. It has a very different feel to it than the regular Hobbit meter, which is iambic tetrameter. So there are more feet per line. I know there are lots of jokes to be made here about like how the Harfoots have big feet, so of course like their poetic feet have 3 beats instead of 2. Makes perfect sense, as their feet are at least 50% larger than they should be. But I won't make those kinds of jokes. Instead, I will just point out that it's really cool. So I am fascinated by the way that moves. I think you can see the I am at the beginning, and I think the I am at the beginning is what keeps it from sounding like Dr. Seuss. Anapestic tetrameter is one of Dr. Seuss's favorite meters. The night before Christmas is an Anapest as well, but that's not Dr. Seuss. What I was thinking was the Grinch. The Grinch, the Grinch Who Stole Christmas is an Anapestic tetrameter. The Sneetches is an Anapestic tetrameter. But the Grinch's small heart grew 3 sizes that day, right? Dun 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 dun, you know, or the Sneetches, right? For the star-bellied Sneetches had bellies with stars, but the plain-bellied Sneetches had none upon theirs. It doesn't sound, the song, Poppy's song, avoids the anapestic tetrameter is an extremely sing-song meter. And it avoids that by that iambic foot at the beginning. Almost every line has an iambic foot at the beginning. Not all those who wander are lost.
My legs are so short and the way is so long.
Yes, my legs are so short and the way is so long. Exactly. Yeah. It's perfect, a perfect representative of how the song works. So it has that short foot at the beginning, and then it flows into the anapestic meter. Anyway, so I love that, and I loved how that works. But it took me a while, like to really kind of catch on to that, because I was expecting an iambic meter and I got the iambic foot at the start, right? So at first I thought I was just hearing a variation, right? Like, oh, it's iambic, but there are some extra feet in there. And I'm like, no, it really is. And this is very typical, by the way. I mean, normally you have to kind of like get into a song, and then those characteristic lines, right? Like the one you quoted, my legs are so short and the way is so long. Or not all those who wander are lost, which is clearly, I think, it's the heart of that line, is the heart of the whole song. It's like the reveal at the end of the song, like it's the message finally received and everything. Anyway, so it's so it really isn't until you get thinking carefully through towards the like into like stanza 3 or something that you're like, oh no, that's the pattern, like that's the fundamental pattern right there. And it's neat. So I actually really kind of like the fact that this is not in regular Hobbit meter. Like it's not in the same meter as the Hobbits, but I mean, I don't know, but it feels to me very much like it's like I would create a parallel with what we've seen from the Harfoots throughout the show. They are Hobbit-esque, right? You can see like they have,
it's familiar.
It's familiar, but very much not the same, right? I mean, they have really done. I think it's one of the things that I love most about the Harfoot, the whole Harfoot world in the show, is that I think they have done a marvelous job of really doing that imagining backwards that you have to do, right? What would a society that is going to become a Hobbit society in several thousand years, like what would it look like, right? And of course,
sound like
it would be defensible to say it will look nothing like it at all, right? It's going to be totally different. You're not going to recognize it even a little bit. That would be totally defensible because thousands of years, right? And yet they want to establish continuity, right? They want us to be able to feel familiar with the Harfoots, and yet it has to be sufficiently different to really be able to bear the weight of years and cultural change and geographic change and everything else. It's literally hobbits before they become hobbits, before the word hobbit can really be applied to them at all. And so that they did a similar thing poetically, I'm loving. Like you can see it's like the ancestor of it.
Is there any way you think that's an accident? I mean, surely we've heard them talk about heroic meter and things like we know they're aware of cadence. Like that has to be purposeful, right?
I suspect so. I mean, I don't know if they think about it in exactly the same way, like in the same terms that I would think about it, right? So I'm always sensitive of that. When I'm doing, like, when I do an interpretation and somebody says, do you think the author meant that? I'm always like, okay, wait, hang on. Do I think exactly what I just said is exactly what was in the author's head? No, not necessarily. But do I think that something was going on here that, like, that I'm seeing something that they were, that, yes, I do. I do think
I'm always curious about intention, just because you can't have, it's very rare in a film or any kind of film type thing for something to be an accident like this, Yeah. So like, I feel like there has to be an awareness, but maybe. It's
No, I think there's absolutely an awareness, especially given this is a Hobbit walking song that we get, right? I mean, that's like a well-established genre of song and poetry in the Lord of the Rings, and they know that very well, right? So they are definitely building off that. And yes, I do. Like for instance, I certainly think it's intentional in that. I mean, like if we were talking to JD and Patrick, and I was like, so this Wandering Day is in Anapests, like, and they would be like, oh, really? I didn't realize that. Like, no, they're not going to say that. Like, I do not believe that it's unintentional in that way. Again, do they have the same ideas that I do about it? How we can see, the way in which it's both similar in pattern, like with the tetrameter feet and with the one iambic foot at the beginning of the line, as sort of the hint of kind of where the poetic rhythm of Hobbit song is going to go down the road. Would they say it in exactly the same way? I don't know, but I definitely think there's some intention there, and it's really fun. Oh man, Amin-Moto, I've been wondering that too. Are we going to see Stores, right? Is this the only group of proto-hobbits that we're going to get to meet? I don't know. I don't know what the plans are. I mean, we know that they plan to introduce new characters down the road. I mean, like, we know we're going to get Círdan. We were told we're going to get Celeborn. So, there's. I know we're going to get new characters that, like, even though it's a large cast, it's going to get larger. Well, there may be some subtraction as well as addition.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to lose a few
as we move forward, right? Yeah. In fact, they're going to probably have to introduce new characters at a fair rate at some point in order to stay Well, I was about to say to stay above water, but that would be an insensitive way insensitive metaphor to use under the circumstances. Anyway, point is, I think that there will be more. Are we going to get an entire new proto-Hobbit culture, right, parallel to the Harfoots?
Maybe.
I don't know if we'll do that much or go that far. Just to make sure people know what we're talking about. I don't want to leave Tolkien newbies behind or make you feel self-conscious if you don't understand what we're referring to. So there are the three families of proto-Hobbits, who are the ancestors of the Shire Hobbits. One is the Harfoots, which they've depicted in the show, or they've created the society for. The second is the Stoors, and the third is the Falahides. The Stoors, by the way, are the ones who are the ancestors of Gollum, right? Like Gollum comes from the Stoors, and so that's why, in my opinion, there's a lot of reasons to think, like, in order to set up
plant that seed.
Gollum for the future, that we may encounter some Stoors. So anyway, I think that's I think it's possible. I think it's possible. I feel like I scarcely dare to hope, especially since I love the Harfoot so much. It would be really, really fun to meet another group of proto-Hobbits. But we'll see. We'll see. Anyway, yeah. So, yeah. Okay. The Stoors will all be played by Andy Serkis, JJ. Yeah, I doubt it, but who knows? Who knows?
I mean, it's fun to be aware of where we're going too. Like we know that it's kind of all leading to the start of the Third Age. So
Yes.
it's fun to plant the seeds of the things that we're currently familiar with. And won't it be interesting 5 years to look back and be like, oh my God, they planted that seed?
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, it's. There are lots of ways. I mean, so if we think about the really big picture with this show, right? Not only do we have to remember the 5-season arc, right? But I also
multiple millennia arc.
Yeah, we know that they're planting seeds for the Third Age, right? We know that they're setting things up. Some of which things there's, I mean, and some of that is we've already seen elements of continuity that they have attempted to maintain between their world and the Peter Jackson films.
I was going to say, that's the other thing I would want to point out, that it's not just continuity to Tolkien's Third Age, it's continuity to Jackson's Third Age.
Yes.
So, like, we know that he had some kind of adaptation liberties, but we've all kind of come to terms with the significant majority of them. So, like, that's in the public consciousness. That's an awareness that we're okay having parallels to. So having, I was going to say Amazon's, I want to get away from that, JD and Patrick's vision of the Second Age, leave it into Jackson's Third Age, just makes a whole lot of sense in terms of like public awareness. Yes. And also makes sense Tolkienian wise, because we're all taking slight liberties as we do with adaptation. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I mean, we can see that. I mean, goodness, this would be a fascinating discussion topic. Like we could have, I mean, not just for like a session, like we could have a whole like day-long conference talking about the relations between the Rings of Power and the Peter Jackson films. Oh my goodness, there's so many. That could be a whole other series.
Not just like cataloging the callbacks and links, but looking at the shape of those, like, and what does the pattern of those suggest for how they are placing the Rings of Power show in relationship to the Peter Jackson films. Really, really fascinating stuff. There's some places where I feel like they're really just like trying to establish a connection. There are other places where I feel like they're really asserting a difference, right? Establishing a connection in order to emphasize a discontinuity. There are even a couple places where I have felt like they're gently teasing the Peter Jackson films, in a sense. Almost.
You're thinking of going into Casa Doom, aren't you?
I am thinking of going into Casa Doom.
I was
the
like,
near quote in
that
episode
moment.
in episode
Yeah.
2.
Where
Yeah,
they're like, oh, the
yeah.
horns are going to play. There's going to be a feast. And then there's not a warm welcome.
The salt pork, yeah, exactly. And the way that they're playing off the parallel scene that they're quoting from in the Fellowship of the Ring film. And in that moment, I think they're really teasing the Peter. I mean, I think that it seems to me like a very gentle trolling of the Peter Jackson films in some ways. Anyway, there's so much. So yeah, it's a very complicated and rich relationship between those two. But yeah, so there's those seeds planted. And then also, like, let's not forget, I think there are going to be other series as well. I think there are going to be other spin-off series after this, which are also going to be set up by things that are happening in the Rings of Power. I don't think there's likely to be another Second Age story, because they seem to be taking all of the Second Age stories and doing the lot, basically. I'm not saying that there aren't individual things.
Yeah, I'm like, at least not right away. I mean, this is the through line we have right now. So
exactly.
I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some spin-off content later, but this is the focus now.
Right. But I am thinking mostly about the Third Age, between, after, from the time at the end of the Last Alliance through to the time of the Fellowship of the Ring, which is 3,000 years of history and so many stories and things that they could do. It is possible, JJ, I was thinking about Aldarion and Arendis, for instance. There are things like that. So Aldarion and Arendis is a story that Tolkien wrote, a Numenorian story about one of the early kings of Numenor and his unhappy relationship with his wife. It's a really interesting story in lots of ways, but yeah, that kind of thing, like, let's zoom in and tell the, like, personal sort of drama of a couple of the characters, from 2,000 years earlier. It's a kind of thing that we could do, that we could definitely see them doing. But there's a lot in the Third Age that I think they could also do. So anyway, so as I say, there's lots of. So when we're talking about the long game, we have to think not only of the next 5 seasons, but of other things. And by the way, I've heard people say, I mean, Mike Trout wrote an article about how he doesn't want to see a Tolkien cinematic universe. With respect, and I love Mike and really respect him. I'm here for it. I'm
here for it. Yeah.
It's.
I mean, you think about, like, all the worlds we've seen adapted over time. Like, I mean, I started in Arthurian literature, so I think about the King Arthur adaptations. And, like, I am here for every King Arthur adaptations. Some of them are terrible, and I still love talking about them.
Yes.
Because it's just so neat to see what people can envision. So, yeah, I will spend more time in that world, even if it's rubbish.
Right. I feel the same way about King Arthur films. I feel the same way about like vampire movies. Like, I love Dracula, and I'm interested in vampire movies, and even like.
Come on, I've gone like 4 episodes without mentioning Twilight. Don't make me bring it up again.
Right.
Exactly, though.
There you go.
There's room for interpretation in all these realms, and I love the, like, spectrum we get with these. Yeah. So yeah, I'm here for a universe. I get a little more protective of the things that were formative to me as a child, so I absolutely understand the pushback. If somebody, like, they keep talking about a Goonies remake, and I'm like, ooh, that's not. Ooh. I understand that feeling, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to go watch it and buy the DVD and probably deep dive into how they made it. Like, I'm still going to enjoy the adaptation for what I can get from it, even if I'm not a fan of it. You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And again, the thing that I don't know how to convey this to people who, and there are bunches of people. And I don't mean just trolls. I mean people who love Tolkien and feel like, this kind of adaptation is like doing terrible things to Tolkien, and like, we just need to stick to the text, and I need to stand up for Tolkien. And I don't know how to convince people, like, in my experience, and I don't just mean my own personal relationship with this and how I've worked that out over the years, though that's a story to be told too, but how every adaptation is a fresh opportunity to discuss the original texts. And it doesn't matter in that sense, as you were saying, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. A bad adaptation is just as good an opportunity to talk about the text, and it will help you to appreciate things better. I mean, the failure of the third Hobbit film made me appreciate so many things about, and in fresh ways. Like, I come to not just the end of the Hobbit book, but even Tolkien's writings and thinking about the connections between the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. Like, I come to all of that, those stories and that world building, and I came to it in this fresh way that made me appreciate Tolkien's writings better by working through all of the disappointments of, the Battle of Five Armies, which was such a horrible film. And it's fine. Like, it's more fun if it's a good adaptation and it's something that we can enjoy, but
the beauty is that it doesn't corrupt the original, who just said they were going back to reading Silmarillion, Eamon Moto. It takes you back to the original text, and you then appreciate it so much. Like, I consider it to be DVD special features all the time. Like, I miss those so much about DVDs, that I then get so much more out of the text than if I hadn't, So, like, going back to the text, I appreciate the broader picture of it. I guess the thing that, like, I personally get concerned about is if somebody watches Rings of Power and thinks it's terrible, then they'll never engage with Tolkien again because it's not fun for them. So, like, I'm sorry for you that that's what made your decision, but that doesn't ruin my experience.
No, it doesn't. And nor do I think, by the way, because it's not just like when one is thinking about like a defending Tolkien perspective, right? Like, I need to defend Tolkien from what the damage that's being done.
Protect it. Yeah.
Right. Keep in mind, so it's not the people who will watch Rings of Power and say, wow, Tolkien's awful, I'm never reading that. Like, I agree. That's sad if that happens. But how many of those people ever would have read Tolkien? Right? Yeah. How many of those people are, and then you have to weigh that on the other hand. There's two pans in the balance here, right? Of the number of people who are going to watch it and read Tolkien who never would have done, right? So it's like, there may be people who will be permanently turned off Tolkien because they dislike the Rings of Power. But also, don't forget about playing the long game on that. I've known people who were turned off Tolkien because they watched the Peter Jackson films and didn't like them, but who later on read it and was like, oh man, what have I been made? This is so much better than than what I didn't like about the Peter Jackson.
And then there's
film.
people that just don't want to be part of whatever's trending, and I get that too. You want to march to your own drum. So, like, sure, don't jump on this bandwagon now. It's cool to hate on it, and then you watch it 10 years later and go, oh, that was pretty cool. Yeah, no kidding. There's a reason it was a big deal.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
Like, here, I've already mentioned Twilight once. I have to do it again. So, like, even when you're talking about like remaking something that already exists, like, everybody loved to love Twilight when it first came out. The first movie made like $360 million. Right. Everyone loved to hate Twilight by the end of the series, and they broke the last one into two pieces. It was so cool to hate Twilight. Everybody was making fun of it. It was so dumb. But the last film made more than twice what the first one did. So, like, even though you hate it, everyone was still going to watch it. Right. So, like, you still have that audience, even when it's kind of a tricky, rubbish adaptation, and that's fun.
Yeah. So exactly. So this is why, again, in the end, this is why I'm down for the Tolkien cinematic universe. Like, I'm ready, more adaptations rather than fewer. Now, again, I would love for them more, for them to be good. I hope many of them are really good. But at the end of the day, what I love is discussing Tolkien. And that is something that, and more opportunities for that will be provided.
I hope you guys want us for 20 years.
Right, exactly. So this is, this will be fun. Anyway, so yes, so there we are. Okay. Interesting.
We did the song.
Okay, we did. I was just saying, we're getting like testimonials from people talking about, how they came to the books or from the films or whatever. There's a lot of people. I mean, I have met so many people. I'll never forget a conversation I had with somebody. This was a very, one of the people who hated the films before they were released was opposed to the idea of the films and never wavered in that opposition, and who tried to make the argument that no real reader of Tolkien, no serious reader of Tolkien had ever come from the films. That he's I don't think that the films have actually had any positive impact on Tolkien readership, or that nobody who is, and I'm not even sure exactly how he was defining real readers exactly. But I was like, you have got to be kidding me. I have met literally thousands of people who have...
did you see the bestseller list?
Right. But I mean, it's not only that. I mean, it's like the number of people that I have met who have become scholars. Right.
Yeah.
And have greatly enriched, the world's understanding of Tolkien, and have been a vibrant part of the Tolkien community who first saw the films and came to the books that way. It's
in the same breath, I would say that about filmmaking. Like, the number of people I've met now that have watched the behind the scenes extended editions and all of the extra material, like that is what makes people creative, right? Like learning how it's done. So I mean, I feel like you see that even with this. We have so many people watching Rings and Realms and watching Other Minds and Hands and watching the Twitter show and watching, the Varking's Reddit and Nerd of the Rings YouTube and all these things to get this content because it enriches our own experience.
Yes.
And that's what opens the doors to creativity. If we get to engage in that community and talk about this thing that we're geeky about, I'm on board.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so here's another topic I wanted to hit on. Another topic I wanted to hit on today was a question that I got from Sparrow Alden. Many of you know Sparrow. She's been a Signum person, student, faculty member, staff for a long time.
Pillar, joy.
Yeah, exactly. Sparrow is awesome. So Sparrow's request was that I discuss the theme of conformity and non-conformity in this show so far. And as soon as she said that, I was like, ooh, there's a lot to talk about there, right? Because there are several different levels on which you could talk about conformity and non-conformity there. And as soon as she mentioned it, I was like, oh man, that's really everywhere. That's a really interesting question. So if we think about it first on one level of the relationship of the individual to the society, right? We saw this from the very beginning with Galadriel being the nonconformist element within the elf culture, right? Both that sense of her, like her whole, troop mutiny against her because she was not thinking in the same way that they were. She was in charge, right? So it was a mutiny when she didn't conform with her group there, right? But then, of course, we see it with Elrond and Gil-galad as she comes back to Lindon. She is not conforming with the, normal elf view of things. With Arondir and his relationship to the Southlanders, not just, the fact that he clearly has the hots for Bronwyn, but the fact that his general relation, his attitude towards the humans there, which in such stark contrast with his watch captain there in, I think it was episode 1, and his watch captain who seems to be sort of the stand-in for the party line, right, of the elf watchmen, right? And then of course you have the same thing happening in Numenor as well. Now in Numenor it gets complicated. So far you might say, if you think of Arondir and Galadriel, you might think okay, so being nonconformist, that's the good thing to do, right? And because there are some stories where the one person who thinks differently from everybody else is the hero. That's what makes that person the hero, right? From Ariel and the Little Mermaid right through every other that's a think of how many Disney films have at their heart the one central protagonist character who sees the world differently from everybody else and wants something different from everybody else. And by the way, you can see a similar kind of dynamic there with Nori and the Harfoots, right, where she doesn't conform to the Harfoot culture and wants to know what's beyond our wanderings, right? What's beyond the migratory round. But in addition, So again, so we have this trend, but notice how it's already kind of internally complicated. Galadriel in particular is a really complicated example of this sort of nonconformity, because she's not wrong. Like, she is right about Sauron coming back, but she's also not right either. Like, it's it is certainly not true that in Galadriel's character we're getting merely the championing of this, to say like, so not to conform, not to accept, sort of the social pressures of your society and to think outside the box is the good and heroic thing, right? And that's what makes you a hero. And that's not how it works for Galadriel. It kind of. I mean, it's not simple in either way, right? Some of the ways in which she's not conforming are actually bad and even destructive for her herself. So it's complicated. She's not right, but she's not wrong either. So it's hard. It's really complicated. And then you get Numenor, right? And think of how both the characters of Miriel and the character of Elendil fit into this whole conformity, non-conformity thing, right? Think of the way that Miriel is balancing conformity in two different directions, right? Conformity with her father's vision and conformity with the the mainstream culture, Pharazôn's Numenor, which is basically Pharazôn is the clearly the spokesperson, also the guide, right? The director of the mainstream, but clearly the spokesperson for the mainstream as well. Anyway, Anyhow,
so where do you see that fitting in with what's happening now? Are we starting to see, I don't know, seeds of that happening? Like, are the arcs gonna support combat?
So one thing, one of the things that I find interesting is how almost all of these, in almost all of these storylines, the sort of mainstream, the cultural mainstream against which these individual figures are sort of in contrast, right, or in conflict, it's the mainstream, the mainstream culture has itself been complicated or even subdivided, right? What I mean by that is, again, taking the Disney movie example, right? So many Disney princesses are differentiated by the fact that, again, like the Little Mermaid, I'll go back to that example because I already mentioned it, right? Classic example, right? Yeah. Ariel is the one person under the sea who is curious about what happens on land, right? And so she is deviant within the context of her culture, and so but that's a good thing. But her culture doesn't change, right? That's never made like people within it change, like her father accepts her at the end and whatever, and there's a growth that her nonconformity brings, right? But during the course of her nonconformity, it never, like, that it remains a kind of neutral background, right? The culture that she's deviating from, through her actions, she helps to bring it into a different place at the end. But it itself,
same thing.
Moana, same thing. Yeah,
Pocahontas,
exactly.
Same thing.
Pocahontas, same thing. It's a very common Disney trajectory, right? I actually just saw Moana for the first time a couple months ago, so I
it's a favorite in this house. Yeah.
I loved it. Actually, I was a big fan. But sorry, JJ, should I have warned you about Little Mermaid spoilers? Yeah, I apologize. Anyway, but think for instance, giving two examples. Think about the Harfoots and think about the Southlanders. Southlanders first, right? So you've got Arondir, who has this within the context of his local culture, right? Like the elf wardens and guardians of that region. He has this deviant outlook towards the people, which is sort of crystallized or sort of almost personified in his relationship with Bronwyn, right? And by the way, that's one of the things that I have loved about that storyline, is that they have made his relationship with, rather than being like, we're going to place them in this place just as a premise for like the romantic longing between these two characters, right? They have almost taken that, I mean, it was one of the things we noticed at the very beginning, that like we're starting completely in medias res with Bronwyn and Arondir, right? Like I was totally expecting we were going to get like the first
Build up.
illicit longing glances between the two of them, and then by
No,
the end
they're
of
in
season one they went, no, like at the very beginning they're there,
I like
right?
you. Yeah.
More or less
Yeah.
there. Yeah. Anyway, it's an established thing, right? And so how it seems to be functioning in some ways is it's taken on this almost like allegorical dimension to it, where like his connection with Bronwyn is sort of like it sort of maps onto or kind of personifies his relationship with the men of the Southlands in general, right? I mean, I felt like his speech, the speeches he was delivering to Bronwyn about her people, right? The speech or to Theo, like the speech about the knives and whispers, right? Where he was talking about like hearing the voices behind the whispers and getting to know the hands that were holding the knives, right? You can see this sort of like generalizing of his. I mean, again, it's. Yes, like he has a personal relationship with Bronwyn, but again, it begins to feel like the relationship with Bronwyn is itself, as I say, a sort of personification of his overall relationship with the humans, which is cool, which is really interesting to see a show which is taking a romantic relationship. How many times have we seen shows where it's like everything that is happening in this show is just like an excuse for the romance? Right, like we're doing this in order to create a circumstance in which this romantic relationship can happen, because that's what we really care about. And this show is doing almost the reverse with that, which I'm loving that. But anyway, so but notice what's happening in the society. So we've got the society, the culture against which he was moving is gone. Like they all died, right? He's now the sole spokesperson. So it's doing this like different thing. And then we have this Southland society itself, which is split between the followers of Waldreg and the followers of Bronwyn, right? And so we have this, instead of a narrative trajectory where, like in The Little Mermaid, right, you have the default culture that she's buried in, right? And then she departs from that culture, right? She departs from that culture and goes over here, right? And then eventually creates a bridge between the two, blah, blah, blah. Right? That's sort of that general shape. Instead of that, we have the whole story is about he remains stationary, right? He remains there within that culture, and that whole culture is changing around him, right? And that's really cool. That's really, really interesting. Now take Nori and the Harfoots, right? She too was introduced at the beginning as this deviant kind of Little Mermaid Moana figure, right? Who didn't fit in with her culture because she has these bigger, grandiose ideas and desires like inborn within her.
Go and interest in the Wanderers,
Exactly. And then what happens, right? Then she meets the stranger. And I was expecting, I will admit, I was assuming they were going to follow like the Little Mermaid Moana line, right? And that she was going to, when they had the stranger come in and like, we had her like trial, not exactly trial, but the really brief and unofficial, or informal, I should say. It was official, but informal trial of Nori there at the end of episode 3. It was 3. Yes, it was 3. 4 was the one without Harfoots. At the end of episode 3, I was totally expecting her to get decaravaned. I'm like, okay, so this is now what is going to divide, because she, it was interestingly clear that she was not ready to just leave. She wasn't just going to hair off on her own, right? It was a part of her fundamental world concept, worldview, that you stay with the clan, right? She was not really deviating from that, even though she wanted more and other things. So I was like, okay, so this is going to be the traumatic moment where she's going to be severed from her society and she's going to be pushed off, right? And she's going to end off on this, Little Mermaid / Moana, journey, right? Actually, it'd be much more like Moana, because she'd be like on the journey with like the big bumbling mystical magical character, right? So whose name I'm totally blanking on from Moana, by the way. I only saw it once.
Make way, make way. I can sing a song.
The
but,
character put, anyway, whatever his name is.
Rock.
The Rock's character, exactly. Exactly. Maui, thank you. Of course.
Maui.
Yeah. Maui,
Thank God.
Yeah. So I was ready for like Nori and the stranger to go off on a journey together, quite like actually Moana and Maui. But we didn't get that. Instead, what happened? Instead, he gets incorporated into the clan, right? And that progressed then significantly in episode 5. Now, I know we ended episode 5 with tension and Nori's doubts and Nori's fears, right? At the very end, the last we saw of Nori, she was running away in fear from the stranger. I think there's going to be some movement further, but that very scene began with her coming in and being like, I've never seen them accept an outsider like this, right? So, yeah. So once again, we were seeing some evidence that the default culture against the one person, against which the one with which the one person was not conforming, right, was beginning to progress and change. Like that was the story, right? Anyway, really interesting. David Proto asks, if I were going to cast Dwayne Johnson in a Tolkien role, what would it be? Well, I can tell you where we cast him in SilmFilm, because we did.
No.
We did. We cast him in SilmFilm. Wait for it, Tolkis. We cast him as Tolkis of the Valar. Still one of my favorite castings.
He has to be godlike, so that makes...
Yeah, we totally cast him as Tolkis. It was phenomenal. Great casting. He will do a great job as Tolkis when we finally get rights to actually film and a budget to actually film it. It's perfect. It's just perfect. Loved it. Everything like the combination of like brawn and laughter. It was just like that was almost easy. Really, that casting was almost easy. My very favorite casting. It's my second favorite casting in SilmFilm of all time. My favorite casting is a Tolkien character that people might not know. The character of Rog from Gondolin. Rogrim is a character who is like, he uses a huge hammer and he dies tragically. Anyway, I'm a big fan of her. If you know, you have to know the Book of Lost Tales version of the Fall of Gondolin to know who Rog is. And we cast Rog. I'm forgetting his name. The guy who played the Punisher in the Marvel series as Rog, and I loved it. I'm like, oh yeah, because we have him like being captured and tortured in Angband and everything, and then he escapes, and I'm like, oh man. Yeah, it's phenomenal. John Barenthal, yes, thank you.
Barenthal.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, Ham? No, not him. Yeah, John Barenthal.
John Barenthal, yeah. I actually tweeted at him to announce the casting when I was so excited about it. Yeah, so I told him. I don't know that he was paying attention, but anyway.
We'll get back to it.
There we go. Yeah. Anyhow, so back to conformity and non-conformity. So isn't that interesting how, again, instead of having like the Harfoot culture just like remain unchanged, right, and have Nori splitting off and using the Harfoot culture as like a background, like a backdrop, right, for her own journey and her own development, which maybe then would come back and inform and change, again, like in Moana, right, having this ultimate sort of growth within the society as a whole, right. Instead, it's shifting, right, from the very start. Anyway, they're doing some really interesting things. Then we get Numenor, right? Oh man. Okay. So in Numenor, here's one of those things that I wanted to talk about in Rings and Realms, but didn't get a chance because it was like this really tall, tiny, small thing, right? It's funny that I was going to say tiny and small, and I accidentally said tall. But the real irony is that I said that as a segue into talking about Elendil the Tall. So there we are. That was probably like a Freudian Tolkien thing. But anyway, okay. So it's a small, tiny thing and yet tall because it's about Elendil. I loved the scene with Elendil and Isildur, when Isildur comes up to Elendil and tries to get him to bump him up the list, and Elendil shuts him down, right? Here's what
Elendil is potentially one of my favorite characters.
Oh, so good. So good. So good. So here's what I loved about that. Essential to Elendil's character. Essential to Elendil's character is his love for Numenor. I think that a lot of people first associate Elendil as like the leader of the faithful, right? And so imagine him in a kind of like leader of rebel underground. I've heard people express disappointment that Elendil seems to be just towing the party line, even pressuring his children, trying to get his children to stop with the whole faithful thing, right? And just do the Numenorian thing.
He can't be outspoken yet.
It's very early days.
Yeah.
But again, the most important thing, that's not who Elendil was. Yes, he was faithful. And we see evidence that Elendil in the show is faithful. His knowledge of Elvish, right? That marvelous glance exchange between him and, or gaze, I should say, between him and Muriel when the petals start falling, right? Like, we know that his heart is with the faithful. And yet, he loves Numenor. He loves Numenor. And this is essential. Like, if Elendil is not, after the fall of Numenor, like, we cannot have, the show will have failed in the Numenor line, like the Numenor plot line, that is, if when Numenor falls, everybody cheers. Right? Hooray, the bad guys are gone, right? Oh, there's like that whole evil Numenorian culture thing, and they're horrible, and Pharazôn's terrible, and we all want to see him get his comeuppance and everything. But then you, like, basically if the Kingsmen, if like Pharazôn's party in Numenor is like the Sith Empire, right? And the faithful are like the Rebel Alliance, if that's how we as viewers are instructed to align ourselves with that, the result of this will be that the downfall of Numenor will feel like the end of the Return of the Jedi, right? When the Empire, the Emperor dies and the Empire topples. Sorry, spoilers. And
we've had a few years.
That's right. If you haven't seen Return of the Jedi, it's nobody's fault but your own.
Correct.
But that should not be how we feel. Or let me say this another way. If we feel that way about Numenor when it falls, then our experience as viewers will be totally alien to the experience that Tolkien describes Elendil, Isildur, Anarion, and the rest of the Dunedain having. It is so striking, especially in Tolkien's later Numenorian writings, like the stuff that he wrote while he was writing The Lord of the Rings. This stuff in Volume 9, mostly Volume 9, Volume 10 also of the History of Middle-earth. The Notion Club Papers era and stuff. Anyway, he emphasizes so much the longing, the sadness, the tragedy. They call themselves exiles when they come to Middle-earth. Like, they feel like they have been banished from Numenor, and they spend the rest of their lives lamenting the fall of Numenor and longing for the homeland that they have lost. And we'll lose it. We'll lose it if we only see Elendil as rebel leader. He clearly loves Numenor. My favorite Elendil line, the line was, I don't know if I'll be able to quote it exactly, but remember he says to Isildur that Isildur has spent his life feigning loyalty to the traditions of this isle, right? Whereas these other people, and he's pointing out at the rest of the people at work there in the harbor, right? They have served it.
Lived it.
Right? They've lived it. They have served it. And that matters to him, right? Yes, the fall of Numenor is going. It's already headed downhill, and it's going to head down. It's going to more rapidly head downhill. But I think I see this as evidence that they are really going to build, or at least going to attempt to build, the fall of Numenor as the kind of tragedy that we see in the books, and I think that is so important. I think that's I was so encouraged. That's why, like, that one little scene, I was like, oh yes, like, because we're seeing really fun, like, again, the Muriel gaze, one of my favorite bits. Like, we're seeing lots of reasons to think Elendil is one of the faithful, and Elendil has, we know where his heart is. We can see where his heart is when he is going to be forced to the choice, right, between Numenor and the Valar, he's going to choose the Valar. He's going to choose loyalty. But that choice is going to rip him up, right? That is going to be a terrible, terrible choice. And I love that. That's exactly what it should be.
That's what makes a good story, the stuff that really pulls at your heart. So I guess that's one of the things I've been struggling with a little bit, is that kind of depth and connection doesn't exist everywhere. But when it hits, it hits hard.
Yeah.
But I wish it was everywhere. There's definitely parts that I'm like, but I don't care about that person. And, I know we're building to a big battle. I've seen the trailers.
Yeah.
Really? There's a big battle? Okay, I guess it's time. It just doesn't feel they've spent so much time building up some of these other things that we know are going to pay off.
Yeah.
In such a beautiful way, that I'm glad for that. I hope it comes into the other parts too.
Yes. Yeah. One of the things, Maggie, you'd be interested in this. I know we're running out of time, but
time.
Exactly. One of the things that we were discussing again at Mountain Moot this weekend, Sarah Brown came on for a little while and led a little discussion on this. Led a little discussion on the Rings of Power, and we ended up talking about this. Was the way in which season 1 of the Rings of Power has been very much like a mystery box show, right? Where like one of the primary
what's under the hatch.
Yeah, one of the a Lost-esque mystery box, right? Where one of the things that's kind of moving viewers through the show is the mysteries, right? Who's Sauron? Where's Sauron? Who's the stranger, right? All that kind of thing. And the question we were discussing was, do we think that's going to continue or that's going to tail off? And I was arguing, well, I certainly would argue that it should, and I think it will tail off, actually. I don't think they're going to rely on... I think that my suspicion is that they're using that kind of mystery box approach to season 1 as a way to draw people in, right? And then I think they're not going to be relying upon mystery, in the same, tune in next time to get more data on who that character truly is. I don't think that's going to happen. I think most of the mysteries are going to be solved or close to it by most of the mysteries we now have. And there might be, I'm not saying there's not going to be suspense. I'm not going to say there's not going to be twists, but just having so much of the momentum of the show being relying upon this kind of mystery box stuff, I think and hope that it's going to tail off. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think they have to have that for pacing. They have to have that to kind of drive us through to the next point. So there's a little bit of the what's in the box, because that's a trope we're familiar with. So yeah, let's structure around something that we know is a bit of a hook, but let's structure it smartly and have some elements that people are going to recognize, and we'll have the answers to that, but we're going to lay some groundworks for some bigger what's in the boxes, I think it's just going to start to assume that we're comfortable in the world we're in, so they don't have to have, I don't think it's a gimmick. I think that word is dangerous when you're talking about film language, but they don't have to have these familiar tropes to hang things on. We'll be on board. They can then get a little bit more sophisticated as seasons 2, 3, 4 happen. I hope that's the plan.
One of the things I was asked. No, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just asked earlier, who I don't care about. It's not that I don't care about them. I feel like you can just tell that some care has been given to some plot lines, and a little, maybe not less than others. It's not like they're ignoring it, but there are, like Bronwyn, I want to care about her so intensely, and she's making these decisions that I'm just not reactive to at all. I have no emotion to Bronwyn or Arondir, to their relationship, to their leading the troops. It just feels like, okay, that's a thing that's happening. Whereas when Elrond and Durin come on the screen, I'm pumped. Bring it. I'm here for that. Yeah. That's what I want to feel with each of these people. And I didn't feel that way with Jackson's trilogy right away. There were characters. I didn't feel that with Tolkien's stories right away. There were chapters I was just thumbing through as fast as I could, because I wanted to get to the bits with Sam and Frodo, because that's the bit that I was really interested in as a 10-year-old. So we have those moments, but I do think there's a lack of development with some of the characters. that when something happens that's super dramatic, I don't care. And that's
Right.
a shame, because I should
Right.
care, you know?
Right. Right.
But this is what happens when you have 118 speaking roles named characters.
Right.
We can't care about all of them.
Right. Right. Yeah. And there isn't enough time to develop every narrative in the same way and to the same extent. I was just say with, I feel like one of the reasons why, because I agree with you, Bronwyn is another character that I am interested in, but my interest is mostly abstract, right? Like, when in episode 4 we got no Harfoots, I felt it. You know, I'm like, oh man, I miss Nori, bring Nori back, right? Whereas like I don't feel that way about Bronwyn's character.
And I struggle with some of the elements of Bronwyn's. Like I know we're running out of time, but I really want to know, like, you know, the sword hilt we've barely talked about, and like it really bugs me that we had that whole speech in front of the crowd, which I've also seen conversations on Twitter about how they've just recreated that crowd and just like picked images and replanted it and shifted faces around. Yeah, there's some janky CG in some of these scenes, and that's a shame too, because that takes us out of the narrative as well. So it's a shame that in some scenes it's incredible, in other scenes you're going, wait a sec. But the fact that they have this sword,
I would say, to be fair, in real time I was not seeing that.
Well, we're a little distracted by other things in real time too.
True.
So
true.
But like I guess I was just a little bit frustrated at the convenience factor again. We're like, oh, we have this sword hilt. Well, that's scary. I'm literally standing in front of the stone wall, but I'm just going to move the ivy aside, and look, there it is. There's so many of these moments that I'm just like, again. So I guess to me that's a pacing issue, that I feel like there needs to be a little bit more of a build up to have that pay off, because it doesn't pay off for me yet. But we're looking at this very differently too. So like it could very easily pay off for somebody else.
And I'm willing to be patient on that as well. I mean, it may just be that you know, the momentum might
and I don't point these things out as failings to the story. It's just like, well, yeah, there's things that I'm aware of, but there were things I'm aware of when I read Tolkien. Yeah. That happens.
You were reminding me of this fun experience I had in college when I finally, there was this woman who I finally convinced to read The Lord of the Rings summer before our senior year. Not my wife, but a close friend of my wife's, actually.
Good caveat.
And just to make sure it's not that kind of autobiographical story. Anyway, so in the summer before senior year, she finally read The Lord of the Rings. And we were talking, I made a reference to it later. I made a reference to Aragorn later on. And she was like, who? I'm like, Aragorn? And she was like, don't remember. She was like, I was totally there for the Sam and Frodo story, but I don't really remember. And then my wife, who was in the room at the time, says, he was the guy who dissed Éowyn. And she was like, oh, him. Yeah. All right. I remember. Okay. Yeah. Him. I remember. Anyway, but it's like,
we all remember this differently.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing. I was just fascinated there. I was like, okay.
Or,
like it's.
I mean, somebody, like when I said the Sam and Frodo bit, somebody commented, "Oh, funny, I skipped through the Sam and Frodo bit to get to the Aragorn bit." To each their own.
Exactly.
You know? Like,
right. Yeah.
And that's how I feel about this. Like, I'm struggling with Bronwyn, but that doesn't mean somebody else isn't loving Bronwyn and struggling with Durin. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so the different people, things resonate differently, and it's all good. It's all good. Anyway, yeah, so we're out of time. I felt like that was one thing that I was leaving unsaid that I wanted to come back to.
Did it involve the hilt? Because I do kind of want to know what you think about the hilt. Or is that opening a box?
No, it wasn't about the hilt, though you're right, we should talk about the hilt. Was I going to talk about Bronwyn? No, I wasn't. And again, I don't dislike Bronwyn at all. I
want to love Bronwyn.
Exactly what you said.
I want to love her.
Right. Yeah. Exactly what you said is exactly how I feel. Like, I'm really interested whenever she comes on screen, but my interest is very different from that. Like when Durin and Disa come on screen, I'm just like, hooray! I know this is going to be awesome. Right. I can't wait. Right. Whereas with every time Bronwyn comes on the screen, I'm always like, maybe now is the time I'm going to find something to really latch on to with her character. And it's anyway. But Neil, you're right. Durin's Bane. I think that might have been it that I was going to talk about. Maybe. Oh, yeah. No. Indirectly. Okay, sorry. It's going to not... I'm not going to tortuously explain my
I feel
chain
like
of thought
this
that leads me
episode of
to
Other
this.
Minds and Hands is very similar to this episode of Rings and Realms. We're just...
Yeah. Whew.
Not Rings and Realms. Rings of Power.
Rings of Power, yeah. Kind of all over the place. Okay. No. So, all right. Okay. The thing that I was... Guys, right. It was about to finishing up the mystery box conversation. And what I was saying was the thing that I take most heart by is their choice to reveal the wave and the sinking of Numenor in episode 4. Right. Instead of trying to simply maximize like suspense and the unknown and like things that could be wrecked by spoilers, right? Instead, they chose the other path of like, you know what's going to happen to Numenor, but how is it going to come about, right? And that when Numenor finally does sink beneath the waves, instead of being like, shock, oh, I can't believe I never saw this coming. Instead, it's going to be this final fulfillment of what we have been dreading and anticipating all the way along. And that's a totally different way to... that's a totally different way to do storytelling, right? To do, plot development. The fact that they've planted that seed, right? That like in the Numenor story, they're going to go in that direction rather than in the like, surprise, oh, you didn't know that was going to happen way. That's one of the things that really encourages me, that they are going to move away from the mystery box approach. But anyway, so Neil, the reason that is connected to Durin's Bane in my head, I like the Balrog reveal, quasi Balrog reveal. Anyway, the vague association in a fable between the Balrog and Mithril and Khazad-dûm felt to me like it's beginning to point in that direction too. And then they're not going to like try to spring the Balrog on us out of the shadows for... if indeed they're going in the Durin's Bane direction, which part of me, I have to admit, my very, very first reaction, I was actually distracted within the context of the first time the whole Song of the Roots of the Hithyglir was shown, because I was distracted by the presence on screen of a Balrog. And I'm like, are we going to see that scene from the trailer so that I can say that, like, look, this is what, in fact, it's not Durin's Bane, right? Or it might be, but it's not like the emergence of Durin's Bane. It's just, the trailer was just pointing to this moment all along. So, phew. Anyway, that was my very first thought. And so I was distracted by that. But anyhow, all right. But we're late. And I gotta let you go to sleep eventually.
Sleep before 5 a.m.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm probably not going to make the live watch party, but if I'm up at 5, I'll see you.
Okay. Yeah. Send me a message if you're up at 5 and we'll include you. If not, that's right. We've got 6 hours.
It was really fun to watch it live with everybody. That was a real experience, but that's a tough window for me to get 6 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. Episode 6.
Okay.
Hey, we take 1 minute to say quick predictions of who we think episode 6 is going to focus on, what we're going to mostly see.
I feel like I have inside info, but I don't. But just because I just watched the thing that just dropped on Instagram with Theo, I feel like Theo's going to be a big old focus on this one.
Right. I hope so. That would be good. That would be a help.
A lot. I mean, right now he's just an angry kid who found a sword and made a tough decision. So that'd be interesting to get more of him.
It would be.
I also want to see another side of Galadriel. I feel like we're starting to see glimpses.
Yes.
When she had that moment of, I can't stop, that felt like a real vulnerable moment. Yes. I want to see more sides than just angry Galadriel. So I know we're about to see her going to war, but
there was a real step forward there. But actually, I think her going to war is likely to be a good step forward for her, actually. See her accomplishing the thing that she wanted to accomplish, and yet, see where that's going to take her.
Fulfilling the role and kind of encountering that. And I also just need to do this.
So that's why he's behaving so well.
Did you guys notice how quiet it's been? I'll take it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there
other
you go.
predictions, I don't really have anything massive because, I'm just not sure where we're going with it, but it sure
Yeah.
seems like we're culminating into a battle. I find it fascinating that they're doing press screenings and ticket sales for this episode in key cities.
Yeah.
So marketing wise, you're like, well, they think something big is happening. And we were
Yeah.
told episodes 5 or 6. So I'm assuming episode 6 is the one they really meant.
Yeah.
So I feel like big things are going to happen in this episode.
Yeah, me too.
We'll
I'm
see.
just hoping for more Harfoots. I definitely don't want to leave Nori. I felt bad because that happened like halfway through the episode, and then we never came back to it.
And and it was kind of disconcerting because she's been so understanding.
Yes.
I like shock. I understand fear. I was surprised by. Excuse me.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I feel like I can understand her reaction. I don't think she's going to stay there, and I
don't want to stay there either.
I don't want to stay there. Yeah. So I definitely, they don't have to be like the A plot of this episode, but I definitely would love to get a little bit of resolution there and a little bit more sense of where that goes. But anyway, all right. Yeah, the stranger finally healing poor Largo, whose ankle I've been expected to get healed for, like, I expect that to happen in episode 3. And yeah, exactly. And probably battles as well. But
if that had happened at episode 3, then we wouldn't have this new tension and we wouldn't have the bonding with the stranger and all of those things about falling behind and taking their wheels. I mean, we learned a lot by him having a broken foot.
Yeah, exactly. But, okay. All right. I'll stop procrastinating.
Call it.
Thanks very much. So folks, don't forget to tune in to, I'll do the live watch party again on Twitch. I'll probably do it only I accidentally streamed it everywhere last time. Didn't mean to do that. That was user error. So it'll be just on the Signum University Twitch channel, twitch.tv/SignumU is where we'll do the watch party. And then discussion afterwards, where hopefully I'll be less flabbergasted than I was at the end of last week's episode.
I couldn't even comprehend. I was like, nope.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so we'll do that tonight, and then it is tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow on Friday, we will have our Twitter reaction show, Maggie and I, at noon on Friday on my Twitter account, so at Tolkien Prof.
And it is just us tomorrow. So
yeah, it'll be just us tomorrow.
Which is a shame because we always love having the cast there, but we're also kind of pumped to just have like a pure reaction to this episode because it sounds like it's going to be a pretty epic episode.
Yeah. Time to talk and react is going to be good too. Man, those shows are so short. But anyway, okay, yeah. So then then I'm gonna be joining the official Twitch watch party on Prime Video UK's Twitch channel. That starts at 1 p.m. Eastern time, and then I'll join in. I won't watch the episode with them, but I'll join in at the end of the episode to answer their questions and talk with them there. So that will be tomorrow, and then we'll have episode 6.
This ends the programming for episode 5, and herein begins the programming for episode 6.
Yes, and I'm not sorry to be saying that. Honestly, it was one of my primary first reactions after watching episode 5. It wasn't that I strongly disliked it. I mean, I was having a hard time processing it all, but I was like, this is going to be a rough week. Was the main thing that I was thinking after episode 5.
I was like, the reactions were going to be strong, and
yes,
you still managed to do Rings and Realms in under 2 hours. And
yes,
I mean, I was told to make my adaptation segment like 5 to 10 minutes, I think, and it was a solid 20. So I'm like, sorry.
Yeah.
We try, guys, but we don't.
Yeah. It's all good.
This is great. All right. Thanks, guys, so much. And for everybody that's new to this, like, it has been so brilliant for us to kind of have this new community to share this with. So thank you for tuning in, and I hope it's been helpful. But stay tuned, and we'll join you for episode 6.
Very good. Thanks, everybody. Bye now.
Take care.